It might sound shocking to some of you, but the camera I use most often is clearly my iPhone, just because I have it with me basically all the time. And of course, I don't use it for bird pictures, but if I just take some making of, some landscapes, even for shooting my in the field YouTube videos, I often rely on the iPhone 14 Pro that I bought last year. And I'm still very happy with it, but now my sister wanted to replace her 5-year-old iPhone XR or XR, however you want to call it. And the 15 Pro was a bit too expensive, so she was not sure if she should go for a used 14 Pro or the new 15 entry-level iPhone. And she went for the 15. So this gave me the chance to compare the iPhone 14 Pro and iPhone 15 side by side. I want to focus especially on the cameras in this video. As you might already see, the 15 has one camera less, but there is also some features that are only available in the iPhone 15. So I want to do some comparisons during day and night in different light situations. And if you're in a similar situation as my sister, I hope this video can help you decide which iPhone to get. So let me give you a rough overview of the cameras. As I mentioned, the iPhone 15 has two cameras. One is an ultra-wide angle with around 40mm focal length with an aperture of f2.4. And the other one is a normal wide angle. It corresponds to more or less 26mm with an aperture of f1.6. The iPhone 14 Pro has also an ultra-wide that is also around 40mm focal length, but the aperture is f2.2, so it should gather a bit more light, especially important if you shoot in low light situations. The main camera is a bit shorter, it's 24mm, here we had 26. Personally, I prefer this a bit shorter focal length of 24mm on the iPhone 14 Pro, just because it allows me to capture a bit more of the surroundings without needing to switch to the ultra-wide angle, which is really ultra-wide. And the aperture is f1.78. In addition, we have a third lens that is a tele lens with a focal length of around 77mm with an aperture of 2.8. If we look, we can also see that both of them have a flashlight, and only the iPhone 14 Pro has a LiDAR sensor. That's basically some kind of laser that helps to determine the distance to objects, so it can be used to measure objects, measure the interior of a room and so on. But it's also important for the camera, because if it's dark, you might know that the focus the phone sometimes struggles to acquire focus, and here the LiDAR can assist to grab the focus. And in low light situations, I really felt that the iPhone 14 Pro was faster and more reliable with getting the focus. Let's have a look at the image quality. I first started out in the forest and did side-by-side comparison with both phones, starting with the ultra-wide angle lens first, so 14mm. And as you can see, the overall scene looks very similar in terms of the colors, the dynamic range, and so on. If we zoom in the middle of the picture, I would say that here we see more details and more contrast on the iPhone 14 Pro image, especially around the bark of the tree and also in the leaves below. If we switch to the main camera, as a reminder, the main camera on both phones can shoot with up to 48 megapixels. The ultra-wide and on the iPhone 14 Pro, the tele only shoots with 12 megapixels. So here I set the main camera to 48 megapixels in the high efficiency format. And what we already see is that the shot of the iPhone 14 Pro is a tiny bit wider. As I mentioned, it's 2mm wider than the one of the iPhone 15. And if we zoom in here in the middle, there I would say they look fairly similar. I have a hard time telling differences, which one looks better here. So let's move on to the 2x zoom, like 48mm. And as a reminder, this is not a physical or an optical zoom, this is a digital zoom. So because we have 48 megapixels on this main camera, we can zoom in digitally and still get a 12 megapixel image. And here again, I really have trouble telling the differences between the two phones. Finally, if we have a subject that is a bit farther away, we have the advantage with the iPhone 14 Pro that we have this tele camera that corresponds to 77mm. So I did a shot here, and with the iPhone 15, I just zoomed in a tiny bit more to get the same kind of field of view. And if we do this, we can see that the iPhone 14 Pro definitely shows more details, which was to be expected with this extra camera, right? I continued to walk through the forest, and then I saw this mushroom here, and I wanted to take some kind of macro shot. I aligned both phones very close to each other, actually like the opposite way, so that I could be really close to ground level and have a bit of this surroundings with the trees in the background. So they were exactly at the same distance. The background is just slightly different because they were next to each other, so they had a slightly different angle, but same distance to the mushroom. And if we zoom in, I would say the sharpness, the details, they're also very comparable. We see on top that the iPhone 14 Pro gets a bit blurrier. I think this could be because the depth of field is a tiny bit more shallow, but it's not a big difference because we saw in the overview that this was not a big difference. So I'm not 100% sure what happened here, but the sharpness looks very comparable in both. So far, both phones did very well, but these were also kind of easy situations. So a bit later in the evening, I had a nice sunset. The sun was really pushing through from the horizon and illuminating the clouds above. So we had a high dynamic range, and that's typically more challenging for any type of camera actually. So here I shot with the main camera, so 24 or 26 millimeters respectively. Usually the iPhone shoots in this high efficiency format. And what you can see with these pictures here, the problem is that the part where the sun is setting is a bit too bright. It's like blown out. So I went a bit down with the exposure. And then obviously the problem is that the foreground is a bit too dark. So we can in post push the shadows. Usually you lose some image quality here. What's the big advantage of the iPhone 14 Pro is that it offers also to shoot in RAW, like many professional cameras. So I did just that. I set this one here to RAW. In the iPhone 15, I do not have this option. And I really tried to get the best out of the iPhone 15 files. It was not so easy because with a high efficiency format, there is not so much room what you can do in post. That's the result. And if we zoom in, we can see that the iPhone 15 shows more contrast. It over sharpens a bit. And we can also see that there is some problems with the colors, like the tonal ranges don't look so nice on the ground here. There is some green and some pink with very hard edges, whereas on the iPhone 14 Pro it looked much more like I experienced it, like just this gray kind of pavement. And if we look a bit higher, where we have this container for the trash and a small bush next to it, we see way more details with the iPhone 14 Pro. So part of it is just because the iPhone in the RAW format, the iPhone is not over sharpening as much as it is in the high efficiency format. And the other thing is that in the RAW we have a higher bit depth. But the takeaway message is just, if you have this high dynamic range situation, you can really get much more out of the picture if you can shoot in RAW, as you can do with the 14 Pro and of course the 15 Pro as well. A bit later it got completely dark and I wanted to see how well the two phones perform. So I started again with the ultra wide, and here I felt that the iPhone 14 Pro was really faster in focusing. The iPhone 15 was struggling a bit. And if we zoom in, we can see that the iPhone 14 Pro resolves more details. And as I mentioned in the beginning, even though the focal length of the two cameras are the same, it's not exactly the same camera. And we see that the iPhone 14 Pro has the advantage here. So let's move to the main camera. And again, we see that the iPhone 14 Pro is just a tiny bit wider than the iPhone 15. And if we zoom in here, the results look very comparable, I would say. Both show still quite nice details. The colors are okay. Everything is fine. I would have a hard time saying which one is which. If we switch to the 2x zoom and zoom in again, then we see that the iPhone 14 Pro really resolves more details. You might wonder, why is this? Because this has an f1.6 aperture, but this f1.78. So this one should let less light on the sensor. So why is the image quality better? I don't know the exact specifications. Apple is not very clear about them, but I highly assume that here the camera sensor is just significantly bigger than here. And then it still collects more light overall. It has a better signal to noise ratio. We know a similar behavior from, if we look to the mirrorless cameras like Micro Four Thirds or APS-C that have a smaller sensor, are in the dark usually outperformed by full frame cameras because they offer a larger sensor that then has a better signal to noise ratio, and I think this is exactly what we see here. Finally, let's assume you want to take a picture during the night of something that is a bit farther away, so you need this telephoto lens that the iPhone 14 Pro has. And again, on the iPhone 15, I just zoomed in a bit more to have the same angle. And here we can see a huge difference. Of course, here we just enlarged the picture we already have, and here we have this extra focal length, and the differences in both in the panel and also in the leaves of the bush behind are pretty impressive. As I mentioned, I used the iPhone 14 Pro quite a bit to film myself for the YouTube videos. So I wanted to see how it compares to the iPhone 15. So first I was just walking through the forest with both phones in the normal video mode to see how the stabilization is and how the image looks like. In short, very comparable. Then I wanted to try the action mode if I walk a bit faster or the path is a bit, not so easy and there is more bumps. And here I was a bit surprised. It was an overcast day, but I think a bit before 4 p.m. in the afternoon, so still sufficient light, I would say, in the forest. And I switched to the action mode, and I first tried with the 0.5 with the ultra wide angle on both phones. And the iPhone 15 was already warning me not enough light available. The iPhone 14 Pro was fine, and you can see here the side-by-side comparison. Both stabilized the video okay, but you see the quality difference is huge, and the iPhone 14 Pro just performs so much better. Then I did the same test with the main camera, so 24 or 26 millimeters, and it was the same. The iPhone 15 was again warning not enough light available, and we see the difference in the image quality quite substantially. Otherwise, not so much changed in the movie mode. We have this cinema mode with this artificial blur on both phones. Unfortunately, also both only offer this kind of HDR output. If you want this log output, you need to buy the iPhone 15 Pro, and I didn't do this. So the iPhone 14 Pro definitely has the advantage when filming in low light with this action mode, and also with the photography. We saw before with the side-to-side comparison that it's clearly the winner in low light. And if you have a subject that is farther away and you need this 3 times zoom, this 77 millimeters, the iPhone 14 Pro is also the clear winner. The iPhone 15 also has some advantages. So on the iPhone 14 Pro, you can choose your resolution between 12 and 48 megapixels in the high efficiency format. And as I mentioned, you can also have the RAW. On the iPhone 15, we only have the high efficiency format, but we can choose between 12, 24 and 48 megapixels, which I find kind of nice because I can have the 24 megapixel as my standard, as my go-to pictures for daily stuff. And if there's something a bit cooler, I can switch to 48. I wish I could do the same here because I feel nowadays 12 is, well, even for day-to-day stuff, sometimes a bit too low. So I would also prefer if I could set 24 as my standard and then switch to 48. So Apple introduced this 48 megapixel high efficiency mode with iOS 17. And so in one way, nice that we have this option now with the iPhone 14 Pro, because before it was only possible to take 48 megapixel files as RAWs. So nice that we have this. I just wish they would have also given us the 24 megapixel options. And one other advantage that the iPhone 15 has is that if you shoot portraits, you can shoot them in the normal mode and select it afterwards as a portrait. Something else that I want to mention is that the iPhone 14 Pro also has this macro mode, but personally I found it really useless because it's basically just using the ultra wide camera and then cropping in afterwards. So the image quality is not so good. I personally got better results with just using the main camera with the 2 times zoom and going a bit farther away. So I didn't miss this in the iPhone 15 at all. Apart from the camera, I want to mention 1 or 2 small differences with the phones. So the iPhone 14 Pro still has this lightning connector. Here on the 15 we have USB-C. However, both of them have USB 2, so it's a quite slow transfer. Usually if I just take some pictures and I want to transfer them, or maybe one video clip, I just airdrop it. It's much faster than the wired transfer actually. But if I have a lot of videos for a vlog, it's a bit annoying for me if I airdrop them to my downloads folder and then from the downloads folder import them wherever I want to have them. So there I still prefer to plug the phone, and both of them offer rather slow transfer speeds. So here the iPhone 15 Pro has the advantage because it actually has USB 3. Another thing you'll notice when you hold the two phones in your hand is that the edges are a bit softer on the iPhone 15. And what I really like is that the iPhone 15 is much lighter than the iPhone 14 Pro. So every time I pick up the phone, I notice immediately the difference. Obviously, there are many other differences between these phones, but this is a photography channel, so I wanted to target it mainly to the cameras. And last year when I did my review about the iPhone 14 Pro, I was not sure whether I should do it, but in the end, many of you found it interesting and helpful. So this is why I did it again. And please let me know if I should maybe try to do something similar next year, if I can get the hands on a new iPhone, or if you're not interested at all.